going to do a spoiler-free mini review at the beginning of this video, and then we're going to do a spoiler-filled rant of Addie LaRue by B.E. Schwab. As we're discussing this book, feel free to leave your thoughts and comments about this book in the description box so that we can kind of have a little bit of a faux discussion back and forth. So let's get into the spoiler-free review of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. In this book, we have Addie LaRue, who is our main protagonist. She is a girl that is born in the 1700s in France, and she lives in this small village. Addie LaRue in the very beginning is very much like Belle from Beauty and the Beast. She lives in a quaint small village town. She just thinks that her life is meant for more than just being stuck in her village as some guy's wife and some person's mother. She wants more for herself. She wants more out of life, and she doesn't want an arranged marriage. As soon as she hears that she is going to be married off to someone she doesn't know, doesn't like, she starts freaking out and she starts praying to the different gods of her land, and none of them answer her. And she gets kind of frustrated with this. She's like, I'm making small offerings, I'm calling out to you, and you are not coming to my aid. And so she gets really frustrated. So by the time it's time for her to get married, it's the eve of her wedding, I believe, she calls out to the god that answers at night. She has already been told by a lady named Estelle, I think she's like a Shaw woman, not to call out to him, that she would regret it if she made that decision, and that everything that is given from the gods comes at a price. Of course, she defies that advice in her desperation, and she calls out to the god of the darkness, and he gives her what she wants. She gets immortality. The price is that no one can remember her. As soon as she leaves a room or their eyes are taken off of her, they forget who she is entirely. So no one can remember her, all the traces of her life. So even if she was to try to write her name down or buy a house or anything like that, it's like she doesn't exist. Fades away into darkness, and she's kind of indestructible as well. She can't die. So even if she gets injured, she heals up real quick. So the story does flip back and forth from the 1700s into 2014 present day New York. In New York, she has now lived around 300 years, and she finally stumbles upon a young man who remembers her. You can imagine what happens there. I think I'm going to stop that spoiler-free review synopsis right there. So what are things that you should know going into this book without me giving any specific details? You should know that this book is not plot driven. There is no adventure. It's a book that's going to connect with you on an emotional, mental, psychological, philosophical level, and it's not a book of like action adventure. The book's tone is very somber, and for me was a little bit, I wouldn't say triggering. I read as an escapism tactic, so I typically don't read a lot of somber toned books. It's just not what I look for. I am somber enough as it is. As somebody who struggles with depression and anxieties, and especially the timing in which I read it, which was like the week before and during the election, so I was definitely very sensitive to this story, and the somberness of it, I was just like, it was really hard for me to get through. So if I'm being really honest in this like mini review here in the front, I didn't really like this book, and it had nothing to do with like anything that's wrong with this story. Biggest issue I have with this book it's not the romance, it's not the writing. The writing is beautiful. The storytelling, and this is, I think that as a story, this was the story that Victoria Schwab aimed to write, and she successfully wrote that story. However, that doesn't mean that I have to like it. I can appreciate her skills, I can appreciate all of that. I can appreciate her talent, but this book just totally missed the mark for me. I just don't like it. It's just not a story that matches me at all. So in order to explain that, I have to talk about spoilers. I have to talk about, you know, paragraphs and things like that. Victoria Schwab was really good at like driving my emotions home. I really appreciated that in the beginning of this book. The biggest flaw. The biggest flaw in this book, let me tell you, Addie never matures. She stays mentally, what is she, 18 years old? In this book, she stays 18 years old. You would figure that in 300 years of being alive, she would have gained wisdom. And I'm not talking about like, you know, she learned how to read Greek and stuff like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about as a person, Addie never really matured. I don't know, I guess I'm saying this as somebody who is in my 30s, and I know for me as a 32-year-old, I am very different than my 18-year-old self. And Addie is a hipstery Peter Pan. She never grows up. I'm not talking about aging as far as like her physical, you know, of course she doesn't, because she has an immortal life. In 300 years of living, how has her mentality not changed? She still had all of the same angst, and maybe that was intentional. I watched an interview with Victoria Schwab and Neil Gaiman, and they talked a little bit about this book. And she basically said that, you know, she wrote this book as kind of an homage to the feelings she felt as she was turning 30 and still feeling kind of stuck in between being, you know, a young 20-something, like barely an adult, to stepping into adulthood. And truthfully, if that was the case, like she definitely nailed that sensation. And it's just, I guess it disappointed me is what it is. Like after living 300 years, you don't mature as a person. Your mind doesn't mature. When I think about her story, about Addie's story, I mean, how could she, right? Like she's not making human connections. She's not, I don't know. I mean, there are monks that in isolation mature their mentality and their spirituality, and she never does. And I don't know, and she kind of uses, and there's nothing wrong with, you know, having multiple intimate partners or anything like that, but she uses these people basically to ensure her survival. So one thing that I do disagree with the consensus is this idea that Luke, who is the devil in this book, who curses / blesses her with immortality, everyone says that the price is people forgetting her. Actually, it's not. There really wasn't a price to Addie at all, if you go back and think about it, because when she gets cursed, she tells Luke this. She says, I do not want to marry. She feels so small when she says it. Her whole life feels small, and she sees that judgment reflected in the God's gaze, as if to say, is that all? And no, it's more than that. Of course it's more. I do not want to belong to someone else, she says with a sudden vehemence. The words are a door flung wide, and now the rest pour out of her. I do not want to belong to anyone but myself. I want to be free to live and to find my own way, to love or to be alone, but at least it is my choice. And I'm so tired of not having choices, so scared of the years rushing past beneath my feet. I do not want to die as I've lived, which is no life at all. Luke gave her exactly what she asked for, which was not to belong to anyone. And the only way that you belong to other people is by having connection. And so she basically cursed herself. For me, the moment we find out that Henry is also cursed, I was like, it's a trap. Like the rest of the story was like negligible, because I knew exactly what was gonna happen. They were gonna like fall in love, and they were gonna, you know, hanky-panky around, and he was gonna die. Or he was on track to die. And so I was like, just kind of bored the rest of the time. And like her intimacy with Luke, like super lukewarm. Sorry. I laughed at that pun. It wasn't very funny, but I thought it was great. Anyways. and even her relationship with Henry was one out of necessity. It didn't seem to me, I did not feel affections between Henry and Addie at all. It felt very much like a love that is based off of a need to be completed. And maybe I'm just not one that believes in that kind of love. Does that make me not romantic? In this story, both Addie and Henry are very broken people. And like I mentioned, like I ranted just a minute, went on a rampage about it. Addie doesn't grow emotionally. She doesn't grow mentally. And then we have Henry, who is also very stunted emotionally and has nothing to do with his sensitivity, but more so he just feels outcasted by society, feels like he's just not meant for this world. And it's a shame that he had very low self-esteem. He seemed to be very loved by the people around him and was the kind of person that just couldn't see it. I don't know, it's something, it just felt off. Their relationship, it's hard for me to, if you guys kind of know what I'm leaning towards, and give me the words to put in my mouth, because I think for Addie, it was a fascination of being remembered and desired. And it's not so much because of Henry that she loved him for him. I think that she loved Henry because he gave her the only thing that she wanted, and that was for human connection. And with everyone else, she could not have that. So it's almost like for all of the freedom that she wanted, for all of the life she wanted to live, could think of a choice that could be hers, she really didn't have a choice. Like, she didn't have a choice but to love Henry. Like, if she wanted to feel human connection, like this was the only relationship she could possibly have outside of the relationship she had with Luke. That was more than just like a one-night stand. What is fascinating about this book is it does make you think about these concepts. It's definitely a book to journal about. If there's a book you want to journal about, this is the one to do it to. I got really triggered in all of the times that Luke came to visit Addie. As I was reading, this realization dawned on me. Like, Luke is asking her every time he comes, like, are you ready to end your life? Like, are you ready basically to off yourself? And I think in that way, that was one thing I did like about Addie, is that Addie always had a hope in her. That was something I liked about her a lot. But yeah, the ending, again, the last half of the book just fell flat for me. I don't know, maybe I was expecting like another god to come down, or I was expecting like a little bit more conflict, I suppose. So for me, like, there was a lot to think about in this book, and there was a lot, and maybe all of the things that I'm finding lacking were done on purpose, which is totally the case. However, when I read this Savage Song, or I'm reading it right now, the characters are so similar. Kate is very much like Addie. They're very, very similar. And then Henry is very similar to August in the Savage Song. And so I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just me. Anywho, so that is basically my review of this book. Pretty much all the big qualms I had about it, all the feelings I had about it. I don't give star ratings, so I can't give you a star rating. I think the enjoyment of this book rides on whether or not you can relate to Henry or Addie on an emotional, intimate level. If you cannot, then you probably will not like this book. Again, there's nothing wrong with this book. Like, I think this was the story that Victoria Schwab wanted to write. This is the story she wanted to tell. And I'm sure it comes from a very intimate place within her. That's why she could write the emotions so strongly. And so I commend her for that. And I hope that the criticisms aren't taken harshly or out of context, but just for me as a reader, this was my experience with this book. My light is dying fast, and so is my camera battery. So thank you so much for being here today. Let me know your thoughts of this book in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, thumbs it up. And if you would like to see more videos from me, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.